It's a privilege to be in a room full of people like this. Silicon Valley has been in my radar pretty much my whole career. Various companies have come up here at various stages, and what I'm seeing in the Valley right now is nothing short of spectacular. So I know you're all busy, and hopefully we're going to make tonight fast and furious, and you're going to leave here a little bit smarter. I'm going to set a little context. They said 7 to 10 minutes. I'm going to go fast. I'm assuming you're smart. I'm not going to leave the slides on the screen long, and then we're going to get right to the meat of it, which is these four gentlemen are going to give us some additional context. But before I click this, everybody just look up at the ceiling. How many IP addresses do you count? Do you get my point? Okay, I mean, this is the ceiling. There's probably 10 devices, systems that are crawling through those ceilings. Look over the wall, you're going to see a few more. Look in that control room. I mean, you talk about the Internet of Things and instrumentation of things. There are more electrical mechanical devices in this building that are touched to very old-fashioned wires going nowhere that need to be on the network, okay? And we've been fighting this battle in the building automation space for a long time, and we actually brought our event to Silicon Valley because we believe Silicon Valley is going to be the next chapter in smart buildings, campuses, portfolios, and cities. So it's really a pleasure to be here. All right, so that's the journey. I'm going to take you on the long journey, okay? Very quickly, though. You're going to get the context of my career, which I think will add some value to this conversation. So that's what we all want, the smart, connected, high-performance city, right? Everything's working, sensors, things are talking to each other. We're efficient, we're not wasting energy, we're not wasting time. But that's where we started, okay? For any of you who've been in the business a while, that's the clunky rooms that you see in all sorts of buildings. That, I think, goes back 35, 40 years, okay? And this was not uncommon. Guys staring at very analog television sets, not streaming to your cell phone. You had to be in that room in order to view what was on that screen. And then electrical panels, you know, the internet wasn't even anybody's vision. Well, maybe it was DARPA's vision, but not certainly a building owner or operator. And then right around, this is a history that was put together by a friend of mine named Paul Oswald. This kind of gives you a quick, you know, year-by-year view of what was going on. One of the big important points was 1985. Personal computers as front end for DDC. We went digital in building automation for the first time, right? And it was now able to be talking to things with modems and some very primal communication protocols. But nonetheless, they started to see what was going to happen. And then another pivotal date, 1999, Niagara introduced Tritium's platform, which was a way of going back into systems, IP-enabled, integration, multiple systems, and their vision really was a holistic approach of the building, open, interoperable, integrated, and to some extent IP-centric. So my journey started in '92. Epcot was really this first smart city, and if you read some of the stuff that Disney was thinking of back then, it's relevant today. From there, we had to travel to Tokyo in 1992, Ken Sakamura. If you don't believe what I'm saying, tonight go home on YouTube and type in the Tron House and watch that video of a smart home that Ken Sakamura, who was a president of Tokyo, or a professor at Tokyo University, envisioned. It's as good as any commercial you'll see on the Super Bowl today. Okay, and he built it. I went there, I was 3 days late. They closed it, I got to Tokyo, so we just got to talk about it. But the video is extraordinary. Okay, so from then we started, you know, we needed to bring this topic to the States, and so we started our conference, Realcomm, in '99. 2002, we wrote an article called Connecting Buildings and Processes to the Internet. We believed every electrical mechanical device in a building needed to be IP enabled on an enterprise network, not a proprietary network, but on an IT network. And it's only a page. We have advisories on our website. You can go read these. This was, I think, the 5th advisory we wrote. 2003, we met Tritium, and they were talking about connecting all these disparate systems. You can see all the different ones: exterior systems, building access, HVAC, gas. Today I say, if your drinking fountain's not on the network, or your parking gate, or your fire extinguisher, you're not done. Okay, so just imagine any device in the building on the network. Then we were told to see the real innovation, we needed to go to Asia. So in 2004, we traveled to Tokyo, Seoul, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore. This is Hong Kong. They wired that entire city. And they had a wonderful celebration on Chinese New Year's where the lights on those buildings went up and down and the fireworks went up. They choreographed all these buildings over a fiber network. We came back to the States, and all the cities we talked to said, who would pay for that, right? And the reality was a consortium of people paid for that, and tourism in that harbor in Hong Kong has quadrupled, okay, since the time they made that decision. This picture changed my life. So we wrote in 2002 this was going to happen. That guy at Matsushita corporate headquarters took an RJ45 and plugged it into a table lamp right there. Okay? 2004. It came up like a printer. It said, a new device on the network. What would you like to do with it? And it said, I'd like to download the drivers for the lamp. It powered it, and it was delivering data. So not only did you get the power, that was revolutionary. Low voltage power, LED over PoE, but then the data. Do you want to turn it on? Do you want to turn it off? Do you want to control it? What kind of energy you're using? And right then and there, I knew that every electrical mechanical device in a building would be on a network someday. Okay, and ironically, the Japanese have dropped this. They were so, and we were in that room with people from Cisco, and we were arguing about IPv6 and all this stuff, and these guys were so far ahead, but I don't think they pursued it. In Korea, we bought a soda with our phone, 2004, right? So the vending machine's got to be on the network, right? So as soon as it's empty, the guy comes out. You don't fill Coke machines, they're full. We stood on the top of that building. That's International Finance Center 2 in Hong Kong. Most important thing about that building is how it's run. That's the command and control center. You sneeze on the 32nd floor, somebody knows about it. Okay. Again, remember, this is 12 years ago. And the way that this building was instrumented at the time, that was the most automated building in the world. Then we had to follow the money. We went to Dubai. Burj Khalifa was Burj Dubai until they ran out of money, and Sheikh Mohammed had to borrow money from his uncle in Abu Dhabi, and now it's called Burj Khalifa, which is his uncle's name. A very, very highly instrumented building, and at the time they were pulling fiber optics to the Palm Island, to the world, all sorts of crazy things. With all that money, there was a tremendous amount of innovation that occurred, and after it crashed in 2008, that innovation made its way over to North America. Okay, so after all these trips, we had probably one of the first innovators in the country in San Diego, Century Partners, fiber optic cable, every instrumented system, disparate system on one network. From there, we went to a portfolio. This is Duke. I think they did 35 buildings on a wide area network. Then these guys, Panduit, built their headquarters in Chicago with an IP-centric mindset. This guy invented the phrase BWAN. We all know WAN, wide area network. He put a B in front of it and called it a building wide area network. Okay, so he was the first one. I think they had 100 office buildings. The concept was we're going to bring it together, wire these buildings, and we're going to treat buildings like a network. Then the government, this was a big move. GSA PBS came in and said, we're doing the entire government portfolio. They started with 50 buildings, including the White House complex, the GSA Fast 50. So this brings us to 2012. We started our conference, IBCon, which was, we pulled the smart building discussion out of Realcomm. And if you see that drawing, that red bar up the middle is the fiber network. All the crosshairs are all the wireless applications, whether it's Bluetooth, 802.11, all cellular. There's all sorts of wireless things that have to happen in buildings, which, believe it or not, don't. I was in Las Vegas at the newest hotel. My cell phone did not work in my room. I'm up against the wall. I'm running around the lobby trying to find a signal. And I've been in some of the newest, best buildings in this country, and something as basic as cell service is not like it was when we traveled around the world. So you'll see all those systems on the bottom. This is more of a detail. Those are the 12 or so systems. They come from different worlds. Some of them could be 30 years old. You normalize them, put them on an IP network, you secure it. Then you come in, you can start doing things like automated demand response. You can outsource your cameras because we're on a network. I can take the camera IPs and send them to a different vendor. And then you have to have that big circle, that operating platform that knows how to handle all these different devices. And then finally, you get your analytics, which tell you have a problem. But the holy grail is when machines start talking to machines, okay, and that's the business process automation. That's when the light bulb tells you it's about to go out and automatically reorders it, okay, through procurement. All right, so where are we today? And that's what we're about to talk to. We've come to the conclusion there's really you ask somebody, and I'm going to ask these guys in a second, what is an intelligent building? And after they introduce themselves, they're going to kind of give you an idea what they think an intelligent building is. But from our vantage point, we have three different cultures telling us what intelligent buildings are. The past culture, which was single system, single building, single vendor, single application, right? Then for the last 10, 15 years, we've had those trying to reach into those worlds and pull out data and pull out functionality. And then the future state, what they'll tell you is everything is IP enabled, and it's out to an enterprise-grade network in the cloud, okay? So we're in this transition period. Just like when we went from mini computers to distributed PCs and the world was changed, so too we are in that world, and I believe that's why it's people in this room who are going to get excited about the network and what that network and those devices can mean to computing. And as I said to you, how many IP addresses do you see in the ceiling? When you start looking at buildings and portfolio buildings as you're flying in airplanes, it's a new frontier. And hopefully this panel will help all of you to better understand it and help us take this, write the next chapter of this book. So with that, Andrew, I think you've got a presentation, and then we'll introduce the rest of the panels.
All right. I'm Andrew Krioukov. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Building Robotics. And we're the makers of a smartphone app called Comfy, which lets every one of us that works in big office buildings control our physical surroundings to improve our productivity, to improve comfort, and to improve efficiency in the space. Now, you might be thinking, what do smartphones and buildings and my office space have to do with one another? Well, the answer to that is consider how many of us actually work in an office building today. Just about all of us, right? And at the same time, think about how smartphones have permeated the rest of our daily life. From being able to order food from your phone, to being able to shop online, to controlling your temperature at home on your way home from work, controlling your lights, maybe even opening the door to your house, all from your smartphone. And so the workforce now has this new set of expectations of being able to do everything at our fingertips, really coming from the sort of on-demand app revolution. But this hasn't yet made it to the workforce. The changing workplace really hasn't adapted. And if you think about buildings, they're just not keeping up today. Consider your office. For most people, your office is this sort of static box, which you really can't interact with in any meaningful way. If your meeting room is hot or stuffy, if you need to book a space, this is all very manual today. And at the same time, fundamentally, the purpose of a building is to make every one of us as comfortable and as productive as we could be. So the vision of what we're really trying to do here is to create a new kind of environment in your workplace where from the moment you walk into your building, that building knows who you are, it knows what you're trying to do, and throughout your day, as you're sitting there at work, it's actually helping you be more productive throughout your day. And the good news here is that buildings today actually have a lot of this capability. Today's buildings have, to Jim's point, a ton of sensors, a ton of actuators, a ton of controls, but they're not being utilized to their full potential. Oftentimes, that's because they're on these legacy networks that tie down to a basement where a facility manager can maybe adjust some set points or some temperatures, but they're not really doing anything meaningful for their most important constituent, which is really all of us who sit in the building every day and who have to try to get work done. And so we wanted to solve that problem, and we wanted to start with what we saw as the biggest pain point in the office. And this is coming from really big surveys that people do that say that being too hot and too cold is sort of the first most universal problem we all have in the workplace. And you might have seen pictures something like this. Maybe you're not seeing that up there, of being huddled under a jacket on a hot summer day because your building is freezing cold, right? Very common problem. Big studies out of Berkeley showed that over 60% of people in a typical office building are regularly uncomfortable with their workplace temperature. And why do we focus on the people? Why is that so important? Well, it's really simple. Not only are we all the end consumers of the built environment and of our office space, but we're also the 90% of the operating expense for a typical business, as opposed to real estate expenses, say your rent, which is maybe 10%, or energy expenses, which is maybe 1%. But the good news is this isn't an either or. I'll show you how with what we're doing we're actually able to both improve the experience and the productivity of the employee, but actually do that more efficiently from the building perspective. So the way we actually do this is by giving every single person in a building access to the Comfy app, which you can actually see a demo of. My colleagues are out there at the Expo Center. If you haven't seen it, take a look. But the idea here is simple. imagine being in that stuffy meeting room I mentioned and sitting there for a very important meeting. What can you do today to make that better? You end up having to pick up the phone, you call a facility manager, you email them, you say, please, it's stuffy in here, could you make this better? Terrible experience for everyone, right? So instead of that, with Comfy, you log in with your email address, and you have 3 simple buttons. Do you want it warmer, are you cooler, or are you comfortable right now? And what you get when you hit, say, Cool My Space, is instantly, within about 30 seconds, your building responds to you and makes it cooler right here, right now. Just like what you would expect from your smart home, just like what you would expect from Uber and from all the other on-demand apps that you're likely already using on your phone. And the good news is that by doing this, you're actually providing the building with really valuable data. So when all of us go out there and use Comfy, we're essentially becoming this additional sensor network for the building that's allowing us to run the space more efficiently. And so on the back end, we do a number of interesting things. You can see a little bit more of it on our desktop interface here, where, for example, we actually learn your personal patterns. So maybe in the mornings when you come to work, you sit by the windows and you get a bunch of sun, which makes it sweltering hot. So we learn that you always like it cooler in the mornings. While in the afternoon, maybe the sun moves around to the other side of the building and it actually is the opposite problem. You want it cooler. So great. We can learn that pattern for you, and we can learn that pattern for your colleagues and make that zone the best temperature for everyone's comfort and productivity in the space. So really 4 kind of key parts to this. As you can see from the design, really focusing on the occupant as being the first-class consumer of the space. The idea of having an immediate response so that you have that instant gratification and that feeling of I hit the button and it did something. This isn't a dummy thermostat. This isn't, a phone call that goes nowhere. Applying machine learning so that your patterns are actually learned and so that we can actually use this data to improve the efficiency of the building. And then finally, something we're calling comfort as a service. I think something that buildings have long been missing, which is the idea that really what they should be delivering is your comfort, not any other intermediary metrics towards that. So who's actually using this today? This has been on the market for now about a year, a little over a year. Big enterprise customers, here's a few that I'm allowed to talk about today. Folks like Google, like JCI, Infosys, WeWork, Under Armour, the US government at the GSA, O-Power, Nexus, et cetera. So you can see that a lot of big enterprises that care about their employees are some of our biggest customers. And how well does this actually work? Well, one of the most exciting parts is just the level of engagement that we get. So we did this installation at Johnson Controls, major manufacturer of building equipment. They're likely the ones who put in the thermostats and who put in the ducts and the fans and all the equipment in a building like this. And so they installed Comfy in their Milwaukee headquarters and actually a couple of other buildings since then. And probably the most exciting thing there is that 77% of their office signed up and downloaded the app or signed up online. So this is consumer app-like adoption of something that before this has been invisible to most folks in the building. And that's really powerful. At the same time, as I mentioned, the building actually had a lot of this capability behind the scenes. So the installation here took 6 hours of the time of the facilities staff because really this is just leveraging a lot of the capability that your building has. And in fact, if we look across our deployments, we get comparably high engagement rates and really great satisfaction. This 83% was actually a big survey we did at a government building that is running Comfy today. But really the best part of it is the people actually love engaging with this. And so we go into some of our customers' sites and we get high fives from just walking in with hoodies on. And they say, oh yeah, you guys are the Comfy people. We love that. So the idea here is that by giving people that way to engage with their physical space, you can really make a meaningful impact on their comfort and their productivity in the workplace. But like I mentioned, this isn't actually at the expense of energy. And the way to think about that is just the inefficiency in buildings today. they don't know where you are. When you walk into a building, it very likely has no idea that this meeting room is empty. You don't come in until 9 or 10 in the morning, so why should I condition that building from 6 a.m.? The status quo really is a very static environment where 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., the entire building is 70 degrees, let's say. And so changing that can actually lead to really big savings and can lead to good efficiency for the folks in the facilities staff who typically have to field all of these complaints from occupants. So that's kind of the short story on what Comfy is today. But probably even more exciting is where we're taking this next. And really the idea there is that Comfy should be this bridge between sort of the physical and the digital world, where we want to be letting you control everything around you to make you as comfortable and productive throughout your day. So that can be both different parts of your office equipment physically. It can have to do with how you manage your space, with how you interact with your colleagues. All of that is within what we're building out. And we actually launched a program called Plus Comfy recently where we brought in hardware makers that are plugging their own equipment into what we're doing today. And some of those folks are here at the bottom. So we realize that if you want to go beyond just temperature and you want to control more and more, that needs additional integration. So really, what I'm seeing here is this space is going to have the same kind of innovation that you're seeing in the smart home environment today. And that's where we're headed. And the last thing I wanted to tell you is just very briefly on who we are and how this came together. My own background and a lot of the team came out of UC Berkeley. This actually came out of a research effort that we were doing there into how do you control legacy equipment, particularly buildings, and we were lucky enough to have access to one on campus. And we built a team of engineers from folks like Google and Facebook and Amazon, combined with building scientists and designers from places like IDEO to make this happen. So hopefully I'll get a chance to tell you a little more about it on stage, but thank you so much. That's what I have for you now.
Can you hear it? Okay, all right, great. All right, so what I'd like to do now is to, you've got some context from the beginning overview, you've got some perspective from Andrew on one particular part of the story. Why don't we each of you introduce yourself and give the audience a brief overview of your background, because I think that's important, and then talk a little bit about your perspective on this topic as it relates to your companies. Should start with Vladi.
I'm Vladi Shunturov, one of the co-founders and president of Lucid, and we're a software company based in Oakland, also focused on commercial buildings. Similar to Andrew, I was fortunate enough to go to school at Oberlin College in a building that was very, very smart, but was performing very, very poorly despite all the technology that it had. And we're trying to figure out why, and it turned out to be a very, very complex problem. And if you look at what we do today, we're a data platform for commercial buildings. So similar to what Building Robotics is doing on creating a human interface for the first time for the occupant that has never existed, we're creating a human interface for the building owner and the building operators. Because again, one has never existed. We've had a lot of tools for very skilled engineers. We haven't actually had any tools for everyone else in the organization. So we've been in business for 11 years now and have over 500 customers. And team's about 70 people, so we're more in the mature startup category. But it's a space that, to Jim's point, is really exciting, and it's really the tipping point because we're sitting on a huge amount of investment, huge amount of technology, lots of assets. And I think both the technology and what's possible is finally coming at a tipping point where we can really move the needle and make buildings far more efficient. And your earlier question, what do I think makes the building intelligent and efficient? It's really, do we have an efficient interface between the technology and the people in the building, both the owners and operators? So.
Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit about, with everybody, all the varying opinions on what a smart building is. Can we all come to some agreement as to why we want to move forward on this? Because if you ask 10 people their opinions on what a smart building is, you'll get 10 different answers. So, Barry, with that, why don't you give us an overview?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Barry Coflan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the EcoBuilding part of Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric's a $26 billion conglomerate. headquartered in France. We have about 40,000 employees in the United States. And I spent about 10 years of my most recent tenure with the company building, creating, designing, developing, building automation systems on a fairly large scale for large commercial buildings. Lately, I'm focused also on smart residential and mid-sized buildings as well. But tonight, I think the focus is really on the larger commercial buildings. We have about 1 million buildings installed globally. In fact, some of the big towers that Jim was showing there, we're the ones that actually built those control systems that Jim was showing. We have a big legacy challenge, I think. And the legacy challenge is when you install these systems, they last anywhere from 20 to 40 years. Once you get all those IP addresses in that ceiling and you put the plaster over those things and they're up there doing their business, then the building maintenance people are very reluctant to rip open that ceiling and replace them. So we need to find ways to maintain that legacy and I would say introduce cutting-edge technology, including technology is adapting to the occupants of the building, which these guys mentioned. So that's our challenge, and I think also potentially your opportunity. There's a lot more buildings already built in the world than will be built. So how do we reclaim that stock that maybe isn't performing at an optimal way? So how do you take a building that's relatively dumb and make it an intelligent building? I think is something we all face in the world. So that's my focus here tonight, to try to bring a perspective about sort of the mature legacy footprint. And certainly we do our share of innovation. We do work very closely with companies like these guys are representing, working with our clients and with the startup community to provide a total solution. So.
You brought up a point about crawling in the ceilings. I mean, who, after they build a building or commission a building, 2 years later has people crawling around looking for problems? The answer is nobody, right? So one of the case studies that I like to bring up is what Daryl Smith did at Microsoft. And he virtually said, I'm not going to get people up in those ceilings, but I can get information out of those ceilings, right? And it's a simple idea, but through the use of analytics and jumping into all those systems, the temperature of the conference room was 73 degrees. Nobody was complaining. But what his analytics uncovered was that the air conditioning unit and the heating unit were fighting each other all day long, expending ridiculous amounts of energy to keep it at 73, and nobody complained.
Simultaneous heating and cooling, they call it.
Right.
It's one of the major energy wasters in the industry.
Right. So if you want to imagine a visual, think of that old prairie doctor that would show up to the house with the little mallet that would hit the knee to see how people were feeling, to an MRI or a CAT scan today. I mean, that's what's capable. That level of technology innovation is now capable in these buildings, which, to your point, have been built 20, 30 years ago. There's many more buildings that need to be retrofitted than we'll see new construction in the next few years. So very good point. Q?
Great. My name is Q. I'm with Draper Nexus. We are a venture capital firm, very excited about this particular space. We're just excited about the fact that you can get a whole bunch of productivity gains. You can get, in terms of retail, you can figure out what products are moving, not moving, comfort, building management. So all of these things have now become possible just because of the lower cost of sensors. You have machine learning and deep learning possible at lower cost through the cloud computing side. So the third area is also in this building space, both residential and commercial. You can do a lot of insurance optimization. So a lot of these things that are becoming available, we're excited about that. My background is I'm an engineer, spent about a decade plus at Qualcomm on the wireless and semiconductor side, and then 2 startups, and also the person who led the investment from our firm at Enlighted, which is in the space. And the purpose out here is twofold. One is to hopefully provide some insight from our investment. And second, also to meet some entrepreneurs out here who might have interesting ideas in this space.
So you brought up Enlighted, a pretty interesting concept and idea. Would you mind taking a couple minutes and just explain to the audience what you were trying to disrupt and what the idea behind Enlighted was?
Sure. So what Enlighted does in a nutshell is in both types of buildings. One is the retrofit buildings, which means existing buildings. It's able to go in there and put sensors in every light fixture, and what that does is now allow you rather automatically figure out if there is presence or motion. Second is how much ambient light is coming in, and third is what is the type of work that you're doing, whether you're a draftsman or whether you're actually working on your computer. Based on those three things, it is able to reduce the energy consumption on the lighting side by anywhere from 70 to 80%. Now, that's the start. After that, because you have these sensors inside the building, now you have a whole bunch of other applications that that during this panel we're going to talk about as we delve deeper. But these are things like you can optimize your real estate usage, how many conference rooms versus office. Instead of facilities arguing, now you actually have the data in front of you. Asset tracking, for example, where is this particular expensive piece of equipment? Because you have a sensor in every place, you can essentially get to asset tracking. So there is a bunch of applications that now get enabled on top of this sensor network. The key thing they solve is how do you get this sensor network inside the building at zero cost to the corporation. Just imagine going to Google and saying, hey, you're going to spend $20, $30 million putting this sensor network in your building. Well, they'll say, I want to go spend this money on creating the next Nest or figuring out the next display search algorithm, et cetera. Why should I be spending my time and money on facilities? So it's really important for companies to be able to get that sensor network inside and then enable all these different apps. Okay. So that's what Enlighted does.
Perfect. I'm going to ask a couple questions where I want to get some contextual difference between your opinions on something. But before we do that, make sure you start thinking about asking some questions, because right around the 8 o'clock, 8:05 time frame, we're going to start taking questions from you. So there's a number in your brochure. It's 650-308-8522. If you text your questions to that number, we're going to get to them and hopefully get you engaged in this conversation. So just to give them some context, baseball metaphor, 9 innings. Where are we? We'll start with you, Andrew. In the smart building, smart city, smart planet world. Just give me a number.
So I don't know if I can give you an exact number, but I can tell you that this is the moment when things seem like we've hit a turning point in the space, that there's finally a number of really exciting applications that we want to do with this data. So I think we're maybe...
Fifth inning, maybe? Sixth?
Maybe, let's call it 3/4 of the way there.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I think where we are is we're at a point where software innovation could begin to move at a rate which it typically does in other markets. The reason why that's been challenging is that, and it's not to discourage any of you from starting software companies in the building space, we needed to do that, but it's generally been a very fragmented industry where all the different systems sit in silos and they don't speak to each other. As a software company that's been doing this for 11 years, we frankly underestimated how big of a challenge that was. We're a little naive in the beginning, but we persisted, and it's generally my advice to you is just be stubborn and persist and try and solve the problem. It's a hard problem, and we've cracked it. We now have over 180 different integrations, and we're not talking about just building systems. We're also talking about ERP systems, work order management systems, technology, data from utilities. So if you can actually centralize all the data and form a consistent data model, you can actually have software companies come and do things that they normally do in our industry. So I think that's where we're at. We're at the point where software companies can finally begin to innovate.
Barry, you're nodding your head. What inning?
So I have a slightly different view of it. I think we're probably at a 2 in terms of where the buildings are. And I think we're probably at a 7 or so where the software is. But a 2 is good because if you're starting a business, you want to be 100% of a zero market starting up, and then as the tide comes up, you'll rise with it. You don't want to have the field completely plowed ahead of you. So I think the opportunity is absolutely tremendous, and I do think the enabler is at a 7. That's pretty awesome, right? So I would generally agree with the consensus. This is a really, really good time to get into this field. It's ripe. It's very ripe for the taking.
It's ripe for disintermediation.
It is.
Yeah, and
it
disruption.
Is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. Q, what inning?
Buy.
Buy.
We're at buy. So I think, from a technology perspective, I believe we're there. You can call it 3/4 or 7, whatever the number is. Both, look, the hardware costs are going to continue down 10-15% per year, just like any other industry. Software is going to continue to get better and going to use less resources. I think those are curves that we all in the Valley understand. I think where we are really behind is in terms of things like sales, go-to-market channels, where we are, business models. I think how do we get, how are we going to deploy a lot of these technologies inside the building? It's not going to be, us on the stable that are going to go into this. It's a unionized labor force in a lot of places. And how are you going to overcome the challenges of some people pushing back on not having this technology? So I think it's more, especially for existing buildings. For newer buildings, it's easy. It's for the existing buildings that we're going to, that's why I say we're still at buy.
Wow. In 10 words or less, starting Q coming back this way, what's the biggest barrier that this industry is going to face? Barrier to entry or barrier to success?
Executive level mind share at those, at the places that you're trying to sell. It's, like I said earlier, technologies and software developed, but how are you going to get a meeting at the exec level to be able to sell your solution? This is generally seen as a facilities play, and how are you going to convert the conversation from facilities to actually top line growth or a human resource innovation? I think that's fair.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about some of the companies in the Valley, the environment that they offer their employees, right, through architectural design and amenities and what have you, that's attractive to the workforce. So how do you bring this layer of smart on top of that and get to the point where, hey, I want to go work for that company because I can control my space, the lights are good, and I can do things from work. I got telemedicine, a bracelet that my employers monitoring my health, and those kinds of things I think you're going to start seeing be offered as amenities to these companies.
True. Yeah. But we also forget we live in a place where you have the Google open space or a Facebook, awesome campus, but then you move outside the Valley and those things might not necessarily be drivers.
Exactly. That's why we're having our conference here, because we want to bring the rest of the world, literally, to the Valley to show them how it's working. And it's obviously one of the most successful models on the planet, right? So Barry, barrier to entry.
Yeah, well, just because it works in the Valley doesn't mean it plays in Peoria. So I think the challenge there is, I'm a fan of where Andrew's taking his vision actually, and I think in those cases where you can, get the user involved, the occupant of the building involved. That's really great. The issue is, in a large building, a lot of times the mechanical systems, the way the conduit and the air ducts and all that is running in the building. The airflow is based on an average for an entire floor, where there could be 100 offices down this side, 100 offices down that side, and you have no way to control the actual airflow, or minimal way to control the airflow in those offices. So you can give people an app, but it might just be a placebo, right? So I feel hot, I feel cold, and you're pressing that, and suddenly you feel good, but there's nothing really happening in the ceiling. So I think these are just some of the realities of the building stock we have in the planet. And I would actually say there's some very, very interesting challenges around mechanical. It's not all a software and an IoT game, although that's certainly a big piece of it. I think there are questions around how are we building mechanical systems? How are we designing buildings today? Just frankly, how is the construction process disintermediated, as you said? And I think when you look at Silicon Valley, it's the place of big ideas. So I think there's a lot of small ideas as well that can be super successful, but I think there's some really huge ideas.
Well, and that is, you said, how do we build buildings? I mean, if you go over to China, they're constructing 57-story buildings in 19 days. Yeah. And they're not badly designed or built buildings. They're extraordinarily built buildings. Mm-hmm. They're designed in a prefabrication factory and brought to that in 724. That's a big idea. You can't find it anywhere in this country.
Well, I think the new Apple facility, the concrete's being poured 30 miles away and trucked in slabs, but that's very rare. It's a very rare thing.
And that's what I think the message we want to get out is how do you apply a valley of big ideas to this problem of slow adoption. I mean, which is what I've seen over a long period of time. I think I would answer that question. I think our biggest barrier to entry is slow adoption. You come in, you think you're going to get a deal in 6 months, 12 months, and it's 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, slow adoption is difficult, but there's reasons for the slow adoption. The reasons are the sort of legacy mindset of how buildings are built. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of practices around how bidding is done and these sorts of things, which can get in the way of progress. But there used to be a thing called a yellow cab, and that was the only way you could get from one side of San Francisco to another. So, I think the world is ripe for change. So,
Vladi, how about you? Barriers to entry, biggest.
I think the biggest challenge is sales efficiency, frankly, to companies.
Sales efficiency?
Sales efficiency.
Okay.
And I say that because, just like I said, the industry is fragmented from the perspective of the technology that's in buildings. It's also just as fragmented as far as customers, how you go and sell to customers like Google, which is owner-occupied spaces, versus how you go and sell to educational institutions or government, versus how you go to sell to multi-tenant investor-owned facilities is very, very different. And if let's for a moment think you're GE and you sell lighting, for you to go and know where to sell, you got to send a guy to count the number of lights, figure out what the current fixtures are, and hopefully put together a quote that has some ROI that the customer would buy. Yep. And at the end of the sales process, that information is lost. And then that Enlighted comes along, they have to collect the same information to close the sale. And then Building Robotics comes and they want to know what are the facilities that actually do have air ducts that can provide the right kind of cooling and heating at an individual level. So if you can centralize all that, it would make the sales process for companies way more efficient. So to us, that's certainly one of the biggest challenges.
Well, you hit it spot on, because we obviously, what we do, talk to a lot of startups. And the number one mistake I see is, I need you in New York, I need you in LA, I need you in San Francisco. And a young company is just grinding through money, not even knowing what kind of real estate customer they're dealing with. There is a big difference between a commercial owner, a single tenant, a multi-tenant, a corporate owner, and you're spot on. You better know the industry that you're trying to sell, because it's the business drivers, it's not your technology. What problems are you trying to solve, right? And I'm sure you run into that. So what's your biggest barrier?
Well, so a couple things. So I guess one, certainly some places mechanical issues are always something you can potentially run into, although I would assure Barry and everyone that we are not a placebo, and that actually one of the cool things about giving people control is that they know very well if they're getting a placebo or if they actually are getting some response. And if it's not working, that sends up a red flag to facilities right away so they can solve the problem that actually is causing discomfort in the space. But I think some of the other barriers here, I'm actually going to agree with Q on this one. I think one of the big ones is around facilities and how do you sort of get out of the basement. Because fundamentally, you can't sell to the basement. If you sell to the facilities team, they're generally seen as just a cost center. And really, it's a sort of rational decision on the part of a company. They're in charge of maybe energy and maybe to some extent real estate, and that's 1% of the overall spend. It's in the noise. And so how do you create something that really has a higher value so you can have that discussion with someone at the executive level? And so, and of course, how do you do that with a product that's also broad enough that it can address a pain point that's pretty universal and that it's not so locked down by geography or by type of buildings. And so I think that's a challenge that certainly, not only one we had to work through, but one I think is pretty universal as well in this space.
And I would add that understanding the organization, we got a question here about our facility managers ready for this technology. It's not a one pony trick. It's an organization has to if you want to do it at scale. I think the most successful case studies we've seen are those where IT, facilities, energy, sustainability, executive leadership all come around, and it's usually a person who's driving that, and then come. You can't pick up a directory, to your point, sales expense. You can't find a list of saying, what's the title of somebody who's going to invest in my smart building? It can come from any different angle or any different department, correct? And I think to have a unified approach to this inside of a company is usually the most successful.
I think, though, there are patterns within particular verticals. For us, it's owner-occupiers, and we sell to workplace services, and that's relatively consistent. But I think Vladi is also right on that if you go into education or you go into multi-tenant, that there, you do start to see diversity. So I think it's kind of a combination of the two.
But I think the key is really to not sell to the facility manager. I mean, the facility manager needing this or being ready for this is the same as saying, a sales rep raised their hand and said, I'd love to have Salesforce so I can track everything. Right? What was the first time that happened? It's usually the organization that says, we've reached a point of maturity, we're spending a lot of money on operations, facilities, and our revenue line is at stake if we actually don't understand how our buildings are functioning and operating at a high level. And facilities just needs to come along for the ride because that's now required. So that's really what we're seeing is a top-down deployment of this type of technology, not really a pull from the facilities team.
So you're not seeing facilities driving this at all?
It depends. I mean, you obviously have thought leaders in the facility space, but if you look across the board, and every vertical is different. Every vertical has a different maturity, is the same maturity curve, but they're on a different spot. Government usually tends to be the very far left of the maturity cycle where they're just getting started. And so if you speak to facilities and government, they don't really think they have a problem.
So for the facility manager sitting in the audience, one of who may have asked this question, do you try to beat this and get ahead of it where you go to executive leadership, or do you wait for executive leadership?
I think part of the issue is, the number of owner-occupied buildings in terms of the percentage of large buildings out there is relatively small. There's only so many corporate headquarters or regional headquarters. The majority of building stock in the world is multi-story office buildings. And multi-story office buildings tend to have remote management. CBRE or some other facility outsourced company is maybe having people drop by once a day to check on things, or they're monitoring remotely. It's very difficult to find a real estate investor who is really, they're treating their building investment like a bond. They're trying to get a certain low percentage return on investment from that 20-story office building. So how do you get to the tenants? How do you actually get to the tenants who have been a long-term leaseholder in Manhattan and they have 3 floors of that high-rise, and how do you convince them to make a local decision and have them dictate, if you will, to their landlord to say, hey, we need to go do this?
Well, that's a business driver issue. It's knowing that it's a multi-tenant building and that the tenants of scale have some influence with that building.
And I think Vladimir pointed that out. You really, really know who you're targeting. You really need to know who you're going to target when you're going into this space. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but who the heck you're going to sell to? And you have to realize a lot of the smart buildings, which are sexy and they're the showpiece ones, they're fairly rare. But I think there is tremendous opportunity in that more spread like peanut butter market, which is making up 80 to 90% of the building stock out there in the world today. It's hard to do a boutique solution there, but if you can crack that, it's a huge opportunity.
Right.
Well, I think trying to sell, my view is, with all respect to the facility manager, I think that there are innovative ones and there are non-innovative ones. In general, trying to sell this technology to the facilities manager, the facilities is like trying to sell Uber to the yellow cab driver. There is essentially going to be a pushback. The legacy facility manager gets a call when a badge reader does not work. He doesn't want those calls.
Right.
You're going to try and put new technologies and the badge doesn't work, he's going to be called every 15 minutes. He doesn't want that.
Yep.
Same thing, you put in a sensor and or you put in Andrew's technology and things stop working. His thing is going to be, I'm getting 20 calls in a day. And they don't want that. So they're going to resist change, and you've got to figure out as a startup, where are you going to sell?
Right.
Are you going to sell to, maybe you find that good innovative facility manager, which is probably where the question might come from. But you might still end up stuck in a pilot in one building.
Right. I agree.
So I think you've got to know where you're going to sell, and you've got to come
what we've
from top
found
down.
is you'll find those innovators, those thought leaders in multiple parts of that organization. And it's not an easy task to find out who they are.
Well, and one of the solutions there, of course, is to make the job for the facility manager easier, right? I mean, if they're incentivized by these calls, which they certainly are in my experience, is can you cut those down by, certainly in our case, being the interface to the occupant? But I think it applies.
And
more
I
broadly.
think there are categories of solutions coming on the market today, like certain types of building analytics, for example, which can help the facility manager actually be more efficient by attacking the problems that are the most difficult ones. So we're seeing that technology come on the market, which is a very exciting area.
But I think it's important to recognize that the skill sets that the average facility manager has grown up with over the last 20 years need to be upgraded to understand analytics and some of these new opportunities. They don't maybe necessarily need to know them at a bit level.
I think the challenge here, Jim, is right. We often do this from a technology from the geek community, if I may. I'm a geek. I think I could say that. Is that we got to go train those facility managers to understand our technology. What about making our technology so integrated in how they think that we're actually helping them succeed, right? Isn't this a better way, right? I mean,
And I think you hit the nail on the head, because the biggest challenge, as I'm sure you guys are beginning to see, that we're faced with in the buildings domain is, one, it's a problem of complexity. So it really comes down to how can we actually make things simple, because facility operations is a reactive type of profession. So if things are simple and you can engage people with it, then they would respond and start to use the technology. Otherwise, it's just going to sit in the basement. So.
Right. Right. But do you agree that it's going to take a little bit broader understanding of what all these solutions represent? I mean, to be able to dig in to some of these programs, these analytics platforms, and at least at a conceptual level, understand the values?
No. I think if you do it right, and looking at the software that these two guys have, I mean, I think it's brilliant. It's super easy, very intuitive. I mean, a sixth grader should be able to figure it out. I mean, it's not hard.
Well, then I would challenge you, why isn't adoption greater if it's this easy? I mean, we've got two great solutions sitting here.
And I think they're finding traction, actually. I'm sensing they are finding traction, and one of the main reasons they are is that they develop good software. It looks good, it's easy, it makes sense, it's resonating with a facility user or others in the ecosystem, and you've really got to sweat that. You've got to take care to understand your user community and who you're selling to, what segment of the market you're going after. I think it's really important to be successful.
I'm going to modify this one question a little bit, and I want to get as many questions as can, so if we can give quick answers. What's a stronger driver of adoption? Energy savings, operational efficiency, or productivity gains?
For us, it's certainly productivity. It's the dominant part of where companies spend their money, and it's what gets the attention at the highest levels, and of course affects all of us.
Okay.
Because we sell to the operators and the owners, it's really operational efficiency first and foremost. Energy savings typically come secondary.
Secondary.
Yeah, I think it has been energy. I think it's switching into the other two areas.
Yeah, actually, it was energy 3 years ago, and then last year was operational, and this year we're hearing occupant experience.
I think that's the trajectory it's on.
Yeah, occupant experience, making
Part of it is low fuel prices, right? You'll see the pendulum come the other way when fuel prices go back up again. We see it within a quarter, by the way. We see meaningful sales degradation when energy prices dip. As soon as they dip, we see sales soften like that, instantaneous.
Yeah. We've been through this before.
Yep. From my perspective, the killer apps are productivity and operational efficiency, but using energy savings as a collateral to deploy the hardware inside the buildings. So
it's a funding mechanism.
That's a funding mechanism, right?
Okay, so one of the things that not only we talked about tonight, but we talked with a lot of companies, is that the visions start out grand, and after the architects and the MEP firms get involved and the value engineering starts to occur, what can organizations, especially on new buildings, what can they do to make sure that the vision is carried all the way through the project?
I don't know if I'm the best one to answer this, because we do almost exclusively existing buildings, just because that's the dominant part of the market today. So I think I'll defer to maybe Barry or Q on that.
I think just to chime in on that, and we do some amount of work with Autodesk, but it's really a disconnect between the design build and the operations side of the life cycle of a building. Right. It's kind of absurd that we design this incredibly expensive asset that costs huge amounts of money to operate over the long run, and then the people who design it and build it rarely have any idea how it performs after they ship the product. And it's someone else's job to figure that out. And a ton of information is lost in the handoff. The facility managers at Oberlin had no idea how to manage such a sophisticated building. It was way above their pay grade. And so that disconnect, so I think what we got to figure out is how do we actually transfer that knowledge forward, and how do we close the loop so that designers and engineers and builders actually monitor, or frankly, financially on the hook for the performance of those assets.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of being responsible for building Schneider's North American headquarters, which is a smart building in Boston. I was responsible for driving that project a couple of years ago. And all I can say is if you're in that kind of a situation, you just got to fight like hell for everything you want. I mean, it is, and we're Schneider, we drink our own champagne, as we like to say, where we're using a lot of our products, our own products, so we're getting them at cost, factory costs, and we're still wrestling daily during the construction phase on VE. Yep. That's brutal. And so if whoever asked that question, if you're in the audience, you want to chat afterwards, I can maybe give you some ideas. But it's
and the value engineering is probably one of the bigger problems that we see.
It is.
And a lot of people don't have the tenacity to keep the fight.
That's half the battle.
They just give up.
You've got to get people who, I mean, I had my regular day job. I'm like, hey, do you want to, sponsor this building? I'm like, yeah, that'd be exciting. That'd be great. 3 years later, I didn't have any hair left. I'm turning gray. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, we know the people who've taken that charge on, and you got to believe in the end result.
You do. The result was fantastic, but it was a lot of hard work. And not just me, by the way. We had a really great team. And without a team, you can't do it.
Even if you just start at the fundamental idea, if you look around cell phones, cars, any of the consumer products we use the last 15 years, how radically they've changed. And we look at the way a building's being built in Chicago or Detroit, and they're really using some systems and technologies and methodologies that date back to the 80s. And if that doesn't get you annoyed, and then you travel around the world like we've done in the last 10 years, and you see this crazy rampant innovation taking place in what we're calling third world countries, that makes you shake your head and go, wow, why do they see that there, and when we're having so much trouble with this adoption? As far as the, if you're going to define a smart building, give the audience an idea of the number one attribute, just one attribute of a smart building.
Yeah, so I think maybe a slight variant on that question is what do you want your building to do for you?
Right.
And certainly my take is that the purpose of that building is to make you comfortable and productive. That's why you're indoors all day, and that's a core part of it. It's undoubtedly not the only part of what the smart building of the future will do, and I actually think there's a huge ecosystem that we're going to see come out of this, and work that Vladi's doing and others are going to be a big piece of that.
We had a question for you. What's the hardware investment for your solution?
For us?
Yeah.
So we're dominantly software. The only thing you put into the building is a small commodity computer that physically plugs into the existing control network. Most buildings today already have, or at least most large buildings today, and most square footage, have an existing network that runs to the basement where there's a computer that a facility manager uses. We plug into that.
Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Billy Rios, an analyst, cybersecurity analyst out there, notable hacker, white hat, by the way, brought it to the industry's attention a few years back that our buildings are vulnerable. The smart aspects of our building are vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. And he's since created a database, I believe, that's found 50,000 open IP addresses to building equipment in some way, shape, or form. And what that means is the little controller in the closet that nobody knows about, you got one jack to the network and one jack to the DHL or the modem. DSL, thank you. That goes back to the contractor so he can check on the equipment remotely. And somebody figures out how to pivot inside that little box and jump into the network and wreak havoc. Any security implications for your solutions, and where do you think we are on the whole cybersecurity battle?
Yeah. From my perspective, the security story here isn't that different from problems that have already been solved in the IT world. This is about applying good security principles, a principle of least access, and putting in firewalls, making sure that only the parts that should be talking to those little boxes are actually talking to those little boxes. Don't put them on the public internet. Usually the most common problem we see out there is literally somebody takes their building control network and plugs it into a public Ethernet jack. Because, well, how else would I connect floor 1 with floor 5? I'll plug into the Ethernet jack. And so, of course, that's a glaring hole. But the solutions here are well known. That's my take.
But that assumes that IT's got to get involved because facilities don't know anything about firewalls.
Sure, that I certainly believe that in the original installation of the building, you would want the way buildings are constructed today with basically IP and Ethernet running most of the systems. You want IT involvement in that initial setup, and certainly plugging something in at that point needs to follow good IT principles.
Vladi, in your world, what do you see as far as cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with Andrew, only with a caveat that I think things are about to change pretty radically in the space because you're seeing a big convergence of IT technologies with OT technology. You're seeing big players like Intel and Dell come in with very attractive solutions with commodity hardware, and they understand IT, they understand security. To Andrew's point, a lot of these building systems were frankly never designed to be connected to the public internet. And so you shouldn't even try. I mean, people with web services designed for you to go and get data from them. Just don't do it. You need a box. You need a gateway. It shouldn't cost more than a couple $100 to sit on the network, get the data, and securely bubble it up to the cloud.
Yeah. In many cases, a lot of it's procedural issues. I mean, they've just never had to deal with it, and they leave devices open, passwords not unchanged. And what they say, 80 or so % of all the cybersecurity issues really are from within, you know, and if they could just tighten those things up, we'd be in better shape. Barry, how about you? Cybersecurity, where's that fall?
I think this subject is covered. I think we should, yeah.
Okay. Well, another twist on the security side from that question is we are soon going to go towards a time where we're not going to carry badges, but our phones will open up access, and our wearables and things like that are going to going to talk about, they're going to talk Bluetooth LE, etc. What I'm worried about is the security at that point inside the enterprise with all of those devices coming inside the security. And so in smart buildings, what we talk about, I think there is space for a lot of cybersecurity type solutions to go track what are those foreign devices not approved by the IT administrator that's coming onto the network and taking the data. Talking about physical as opposed to external attacks. These are people that are coming into the building.
Two of our big discussions on that are going to be external threat penetration testing, right, from the outside. But we're finding that a lot of the guys are spending a lot of time with looking at behavior inside the network and looking for anomalies, and that a lot of the problems are probably going to start from within as opposed to without. I mean, and if you think about it, a building's not a high-profile financial institution, but you know, if you turn off lights in a major building in New York City, you know, in the middle of an event, you could get some attention. So we've been on the phone with probably 150 people in the last 30 days, and if there was one topic that was on everybody's mind, it's cybersecurity. You know, and so they want to go deep. We're going to go deep, and I think your point is get some good IT governance in place, and 2 years from now, that's not going to be as much of an issue. Speaking of kind of hype cycles, because cybersecurity has gotten a little hype, IoT, is it going to continue? Is it going to fade? Is it going to become a different name? And what impact is IoT going to have on buildings from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think IoT, depending on how you define it, is just getting started. I think it's the promise of what do all the things around us do for us physically, and what is enabled when we actually network them all and put smart applications on top of them. So I think we're just seeing the beginning of that wave.
Okay.
That's my take.
Actually just came back a couple of weeks ago from a media event that Dell organized. We're analysts in media on that specific topic. And I think a lot of analysts were dissatisfied with the disparity between the hype and what actually has been delivered across all verticals, not just buildings.
Right.
But I think if you look at buildings, frankly, we've been doing IoT from the very moment where we started wiring actuators and sensors to a central computing unit. So this is probably the industry with the most experience, and to your point, most infrastructure already out there. So if any vertical out there will deliver value in IoT, it's going to start with buildings.
Right, I agree. A lot of devices. Barry?
Yeah, so I really think it'll have a profound impact on buildings and how they're built today, particularly wireless sensors and the like. You know, in a building of this size, you know, I would guess there's a couple thousand computers involved, small controllers, computer sensors at least, controlling the environment here in this facility. I'm thinking in this park here, there could be upwards of 50,000 sensors and so forth, and we're undersensed, right? That 50,000 is just, you know, we're value engineered in 50,000 in this park. We could certainly find things to do if we had 150,000. So then where you need to take that thought process, because I think the notion of ubiquitous sensing is a very powerful notion in buildings. I do think it's one of the answers to that legacy base that I was mentioning to you in terms of recapturing and reclaiming and making that older space more attractive for occupants and for energy savings. A key challenge there, which I think is, you mentioned cybersecurity, that goes without saying. A very key challenge is at the data layer. And those of you that are data people, when you have these sensors, they appear to be very flat in these systems. This is like, think of a huge Excel spreadsheet with just a list of sensors, right? So Vladimir knows what I'm talking about.
Points list.
Yeah, a points list. So what I think where we need to go is how do we put ontologies around that, and how do we develop semantic rules for engaging with those sensors so that we can give some structure to that peanut butter, so we can actually partition it, group it, sort it, collect it, filter it, program it, and harvest that sensor array. Because it's a sensor array and putting another huge list of sensors in that spreadsheet, you're going to get lost in data. So, and then then the last thing I would say on this is I think it's a very important and timely topic in the industry. And I think with the kind of entrepreneurial folks we have here tonight. So once you have these ontologies and these semantics, then you can put a cognitive layer on there. Right? You can go beyond the sort of brute force analytics and start putting learning on top of that structure. If you don't have that structure, it becomes unfathomable. It's just a sea of data. Random sensors. So if anybody here in the audience has bright ideas on how to go and think ahead 3-4 years in terms of, oh, geez, like we've gone 10x on the sensor side and putting sensors out there, but it's a mess.
That's a good segue to a question. When we do sensor up the world in these buildings, from temperature, light, humidity, motion, whatever we're going to sense, at what point do we start having the conversation of convenience versus privacy? Does that come into play?
It's already an issue.
Pardon me?
It's already an issue.
It's already an issue. So how do we, okay, I can get comfy, hot and cold, but I don't like the fact that you know that I go to the bathroom 3 times a day.
Yeah, so this is certainly a question we sometimes get, and you can think about it in some sense with a parallel to the consumer world of, why do you post things on Facebook, right, or any other social service? And the answer really is that you're getting something out of it, right? You enjoy the interaction with your friends and colleagues. And so I think the same principle applies here. We need to follow an opt-in approach, or the ability to, you don't have to give any of your information if you don't want, but you're gaining something by doing so. And I think that's really key, that the reason, certainly for us, the reason we get high usage is because people actually want to use this. It's not a survey. It's not whatever else you might do. And
so
I think that
they're
addresses the
opting
privacy.
in.
They're opting in. That's right.
But I think the two big things in terms of privacy are audio and video. And as long as people feel comfortable that their continuous video is not being uploaded, or in the case of audio, their speech, whatever they're doing, is not continuously be recorded by the sensors, I think at that point the trade-off that Andrew talked about works. And so what we're going to see is a lot more edge computing that's going to happen at these sensors, just because there's a lot more. Our mobile processors are becoming better, so you don't need to upload the entire video stream up there or the entire audio stream. You just go trigger off of whatever events and just that relevant information.
Right.
So I think the trade-off with privacy will be solved with
The refrigerator itself will be extra smart, and it only send a few pieces of information.
So the edge computing is going to solve a lot of the privacy.
But how does the user know that that thing that looks like a video camera is not sending my video data? It's just looking for motion.
I think the answer is millennials. I mean, we've traded in, frankly, convenience for privacy, and moving forward, that's just the way
But
the world works.
Samsung delivered screens to people's houses with cameras that were watching people on their couch. I'm not sure I want to let somebody watch my, with the idea that it was improving.
Yeah.
They wanted to understand the watching habits of their consumers.
I mean, the Echo is already listening to everything you talk anyways.
Yeah.
The what?
The Amazon Echo is already
Amazon
listening
Echo.
to everything you
You know,
talk.
I guess I would say there's a good opportunity for lawyers here tonight, too.
I think if we're going to take this thing to the level 3-4 years down the road, like you talked about, we have to get this privacy issue figured out.
Yeah,
Now,
it's a very big issue.
Okay, so last question. What is your advice for entrepreneurs considering the smart building space?
Well, first of all, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's a really exciting space, and much to the point of IoT taking off. And I think I agree with everybody here that this is going to be one of the places where it happens first within your work. It's just such an important economic area. It's a place we all spend time. As far as advice, from my perspective, team. I think it really matters who you found your company with, who your very early hires are. Some people say it sets the upper bar of who you're going to bring on. I don't think that's necessarily true, but it certainly is. You can build anything with the right group of folks, and I think that's really important.
I mean, I think from our perspective, what we're really enabling is getting the industry to a tipping point where we can have software companies innovate in a more traditional way. And so please join this industry. We need all the help we can get. I think as far as advice is, I'm not a big fan of the word disruption because I don't think it applies to buildings, because you don't just go and do a rip and replace. I ripped and replaced my thermostat. You don't rip and replace your BMS system. It's just not what happens. You build on the shoulders of others as we move forward. So you're really here to build transformative technology. And we also don't need more fragmentation in this space. We need people who can collaborate, will collaborate, and really here to connect the dots and kind of drive towards convergence, drive towards that singular data model so people can work around it and not always start from scratch. So that'd be my advice, is collaborate with everyone else who's working in the space already.
It's funny, I guess I was asked to join this to be the staid legacy guy, and I completely disagree. I mean, we're in Silicon Valley, and I think, I think if anybody can disrupt and capture the world, it's you. And maybe you're not exactly here in this room tonight, but maybe you know somebody that is. And I would suggest that you definitely get involved in the industry. There's massive, massive, massive opportunity in the world here. We need the Uber of buildings. I mean, come on, let's go. I mean, just, we can do all that other kind of other stuff in Boston. We tend to be good about being diligent and prudent and all that kind of stuff. We need new ideas. So bring them on.
Good answer.
Very. Advice here would be, to the entrepreneurs is go figure out, again, this is going to sound like a cliched VC, but go figure out how to go sell painkillers as opposed to vitamins. Figure out, how to sell productivity. That's 100x more powerful than energy. Go figure out efficiency. I think there were two charts, I believe, one of you guys showed, and that was really powerful as opposed to selling energy efficiency and things like that. Figure out how you're going to integrate with the workflow inside. If it's productivity, figure out the human resource management system, the HRM software that you're going to integrate with. Do the hard work in the integration as opposed to just saying, hey, look, this beautiful analytics that you're going to see after you do my app. Go take that extra step. And in terms of the last piece of advice, this is true for any entrepreneur, not just buildings. When you're going and raising money, figure out if this VC is really going to do the deal or is just dating you and playing you.
Right, yeah. I'll add one final thought to that is find something about this smart building space that you're truly passionate about, that really gets you up early and keeps you up late, because it's hard. There's a lot of battles, as Barry talked about, fighting, but if you find that part of this story that's important to you, it will drive you, and you'll end up making a lot of money. And then from the context of solving problems, we only had 1 billion people on the planet about 200 years ago, and in 200 short years, we've added 6 billion people to the planet. And if you take things like water and gas and oil and natural gas, and you look at what we consume in the West per capita, and you apply that to these 6 billion new people, it doesn't work. My smartest friends tell me we need 10 planets of natural resources with our current lifestyles, right? So there's big problems to be solved here, and if you fly over an airplane over a city and look at all those buildings, they're wasting, they're not run well, solve those problems. And get creative. And I agree with Barry. I mean, so we're relying on Silicon Valley to take this to another level, and hopefully some of you are in this room tonight. So with that, panel, thank you so much. You've been awesome, great perspectives, and hopefully we answer some questions now.